Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath, editor of ForbesWomen. Fawn Weaver is the driving force behind Uncle Nearest Premium Whiskey, one of the fastest growing American whiskey brands that Forbes estimates is worth more than $1 billion. Fawn last year also became a New York Times bestselling author, and she joins us today. Fawn, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So I was listening to an interview you did recently, and I think this is a great place to start. You said, quote, "I think people think the end result is indicative of where someone began. I prove the end result has nothing to do with where you begin."
Yeah.
What should the Forbes audience know about where you began?
Well, it is, what I'm referring to there is the fact that I left home when I was 15 years old. And I moved to Jordan Downs, which is the projects in Watts, Los Angeles, California. And I was there for a period of time. And then I lived in 3 homeless shelters by the time I was 18 years old. And then dropped out of high school in between there. And by the time I was 20, I had tried to commit suicide twice. That's my beginning that I'm talking about there. And so so often when you hear about the success of entrepreneurs, so much of that is skipped. And I go, no, don't skip that part. All of that is important because it framed who I am and it helped me to build a fortitude that most people don't have.
You experienced hardship at such a young age. Mm-hmm. What were the skills you developed then that you have used as an entrepreneur?
No nonsense. And being authentically me, because it's what led me to suicide is trying to fit into a world that tries to create and to shape and to mold people into robots, into people that think like them and have the same political thought process, have the same background or worldview. And we don't. We're all created to be so incredibly unique, and yet we're all acting like we think alike and we should think alike. And so my thought process, I can look at something, people can be debating something back and forth. And I'm looking at it and going, yeah, I don't agree with neither one of you. But a part of that is because I love my worldview. I love every experience that I had that shaped me to become who I am. I think for those who come up, especially entrepreneurs, business people, if you've come up and your road has been easy and the most difficult thing that you had to experience was getting high scores on a test or in your grades, you typically don't have street smarts, right? And you typically don't have an ability to be able to communicate with people who did not grow up with a silver spoon in their mouth or did not grow up with a very easy path. Because I've had a challenging past, but then forged a different kind of future, I can be in a room with the President of the United States, with 100 billionaires, or in the kitchen with custodians. And I'm the same person, and I feel so comfortable in every single one of those settings.
Oh, that's interesting. You're the same person in all of those
rooms. Every setting, every room, every setting. Any person that you talk to about me, no matter what room I was in, they will say, she's that same girl. That is just who I am.
And that girl had a vision for Uncle Nearest Whiskey. Can you take us back for folks who are watching who may not have read Chloe's story on you last year or who had seen you at our Power Women Summit? Yeah. Take us back. What was the inspiration behind building this brand?
When you look at the bourbon industry, and I was a bourbon drinker before I came into this industry. When you look at the bourbon industry overall, we've had bourbon for 400 years, essentially, officially for a couple of 100 years. But there had never been, prior to Uncle Nearest hitting the shelves, prior to Nearest Green Tennessee Whiskey, there had never been a bourbon brand that honored anyone or commemorated anyone or talked about anyone that wasn't a white male. I think Johnny Walker tried to do it with Jane Walker, so I was super disappointed when I learned they made her up. And so you have an entire industry, one of America's most foremost industries around the world. And we know that because every single time tariffs, there are retaliatory tariffs, the 2 industries that get hit first, agriculture, bourbon, every single time, because around the world, bourbon is seen as apple pie, as American as apple pie. And so we know how important that industry is. And yet our country is 70% women and people of color. And there was never a bottle that spoke to anyone in that 70%. And so my love for bourbon wasn't impacted by that because I didn't know it until I came into the industry and started looking and saying, hey, wait a minute. But what drew me to the industry wasn't the bourbon itself. What drew me to the industry was the story of Nearest Green, the first known African-American master distiller, the teacher of Jack Daniel, the only known master distiller for Jack Daniel Distillery No. 7. And this story was lost to time in 1978. So the entire time Jack Daniel was alive, his descendants were alive and running the distillery, whether as president of the distillery or the head of the board, the entire time until 1978. The story of Nearest Green, his significance, his legacy in that company that is known around the world, it was always a part of the story. It was always a part of the official history. So much so that Nearest's descendants, when they were in college, they would bring friends back to the distillery for a tour so that their friends could hear about their ancestor. Like there was so much pride from the Green family. And then the story disappeared in 78. So from 78 until the time that the story reemerged because of that photo in 2016, that story was gone. And if it weren't for the fact that Jack Daniel took a photo with, the only known photo that we have of him taking a picture with anyone other than himself. So the only known photo of Jack with other people, he decides to cede the center position of the entire photograph to an African-American man. This is taken circa 1904. And if you did something like that, I could just imagine the photographer behind the camera going, I'm sorry, there's a black man, there's a Negro in the center of this photo. Do y'all realize there's a Negro in the center of this photo? The photo was meant to be about Jack, about his business, about his legacy. And he chose to put an African-American man, Nearest Green's son, George Green, to the right of him, and then he stepped off center. That's, to me, he was trying to say something. He was trying to do something. And I wanted to know what was that statement he was making. And as I dove into it, it was very clear that the statement that he was making was, this is my mentor. This is my friend. This is that person where there would be no Jack Daniel Distillery known around the world if it wasn't for Nearest Green making this whiskey and then his sons continuing in his footsteps. This would not be what it is. And so he also had the foresight to know at some point someone would try to erase the story, but they wouldn't be able to because they'd have to deal with that photo.
I've heard you tell this story before. I just got goosebumps again hearing it. It's so powerful. So you were drawn to the story of Nearest Green. Yeah. What's the next step? Did you find a recipe? Was that the basis of what we now know as Uncle Nearest? Or did you talk to his descendants and come up with a whole new mash bill?
Yeah, so we have the original recipe. The original recipe calls for corn malt. We did one batch with the corn malt and decided, now we understand why they don't use corn malt anymore. It is such a hassle and it doesn't make it taste any better. So we were like, replace the corn malt with corn, we'll be just fine. We have the original recipe, but what people don't understand is what made Nearest Green's whiskey, what he was making for Jack Daniel, what it made it so special wasn't the recipe. There were 16 distilleries in a 4-mile radius. They were all using essentially the same recipe. And the recipe would change every season. So we have the original written down, and they literally, it's the grain, the mash bill is changing per season. And so the recipe did not matter as much as the process. And it's what I love about Tennessee whiskey. Tennessee whiskey, by legal definition, is a straight bourbon whiskey. It's why I can refer to Uncle Nearest and Nearest Green as Tennessee whiskey or bourbon or both. But the difference between bourbon and Tennessee whiskey is the process that came in with the West Africans. It is the process that Nearest Green was utilizing, that he taught a young Jack Daniel. You cannot categorize your bourbon as Tennessee whiskey unless it's made in Tennessee and unless it follows the Lincoln County process, taking traditional bourbon distillate, running it through sugar maple charcoal before it goes to the barrels to remove the congeners. So one of the things that people learn when they're sipping on Uncle Nearest is that they can sip on it, and as long as they don't add sugar or carbonation, they could sip on that thing all night and wake up in the morning and be perfectly refreshed. That's the Lincoln County process in moving those congeners out of there. It also is a process that makes it so perfectly flavorful that, well, the barrels do anyhow, that on the other side of it, nothing needs to be added. So Uncle Nearest Green, none of our bottles have ever added anything. So every single one is naturally fat-free, carb-free, sugar-free, and gluten-free. People wouldn't think about that, but that's because we've been so accustomed in America to drinking spirits that have additives that we didn't realize the way that Nearest made it to begin with was perfect.
You talk about where you are now personally is not where you begin. And the same is true for a business.
Yes.
Forbes estimates that Uncle Nearest is worth a little more than $1 billion.
Yes.
But if you think back to the early days or the stepping stones it took to get to where you are now, what was an early challenge in building a Tennessee whiskey brand in the U.S., and how did you overcome that challenge?
The challenges still exist. Every year presents a new variation of the same challenges. Capital is always a challenge, and you talk to entrepreneurs all the time. People assume that when you get to a certain level, when you're making a certain amount of revenue, that then everything else is easy. There's a reason a company can be worth $3 trillion and they're still raising capital. The bigger you get, the faster you're growing, the more money it costs. And so making sure that I'm raising smart money and ensuring that I still maintain control and I only bring in investors that support my vision, my long-term vision, that's not easy to do. That's one of the largest challenges. But I would say the largest challenge in the spirits business overall that most consumers don't realize, I can't sell directly to the consumer outside of my distillery. I can't sell to the restaurant, the bars, the retailers, the amusement parks, any place where you go and you get Uncle Nearest. I was not allowed to sell it to them. I could go into those places and tell them why they should carry it, just like we ask for everybody to do that on our behalf. But it's ultimately up to a middle group, a center party, it's a second tier in our industry, the distributor tier. The challenge there is the distributors, most of their bills are paid for by the 6 largest spirit conglomerates. They easily control more than 90% of the volume of alcohol sales in this country. 6 companies. And so then you have a company like Uncle Nearest that, yes, it's fast growing, but we are still so tiny when it comes to the revenue for these distributors. So if one of the big guys comes to the distributor and says, listen, I need you to buy $100 million worth of product this quarter so that my report says, my 10K or my 10Q says fill in the blank, then my $10 million order all of a sudden is put on hold because they're beholden to the big guys. And so one of the things we've been really fortunate about is people who know the story of Uncle Nearest, they become evangelists, especially when they come to our distillery. They leave as evangelists and they'll go to restaurants and say, listen, if you don't have Uncle Nearest, I'm not ordering a spirit. I'll have wine. Here's the deal. Those restaurants make so much less money flowing to the bottom line when you buy wine. And so when someone says, I'll have Uncle Nearest, I don't have it. Okay, I'll have a Coke. Oh, that gets that restaurant's attention. And so we have people doing that all around the country. And so it forces the hand of the distributors of the second tier to say, we better back this brand because America loves it. But if we didn't have that, we probably would not exist.
I have about 10 follow-up questions to what you just said there, but let's go with the customer and let's bring in this book, which you published last year and which has hit the bestseller list.
Yes.
How has the book played into perhaps the customer acquisition strategy, if at all?
It's been huge for a couple of reasons. Number one, it is a huge driver for people coming to the distillery and really learning more and experiencing it. When you come to our distillery, no matter what your background is, race, political affiliation, we don't care. We love everyone, and you feel it on our grounds. So no matter where else, they could be debating everything across America. But when you come to Shelbyville, Tennessee, and you come on the grounds of Nearest Green Distillery, you know that you are welcome with every thought, every background, everything. And so that's important because you can't come to Nearest Green Distillery and not leave there an evangelist. You meet the people that are behind this brand, the people who love it, the people who support it, and the people who this supports. And so that's a huge part of it. The other piece is because our company grew in an industry that historically has never seen a woman or a person of color out front as a founder and CEO and succeeding at it. Because of that, so many people assumed that one of the big guys were actually behind this brand and I was a face. That was throughout the industry with bartenders, with restaurant owners. They're like, yeah, we've heard about that. But the assumption was one of two things. Either I was the face of the company or I was building this to sell to one of the big guys. In either instance, no one wanted to get really behind it, at least not in the industry, because then they're looking at it and going, oh, she's going to just sell to one of the spirit conglomerates, or she's not even really the founder and owner of this. She's just the face. And this book shatters that notion. And people get to see how much I've sacrificed to be sitting across from you and still how much I sacrifice. Part 2 of this book and in the building from where this book leaves off to where we're going next, the number of challenges in that's a whole book by itself.
We'll get to where you're going next, but I want to tie something you just said to something you also said about distributors. We were at a dinner last fall where you kind of talked about that distribution layer at the time. And you made a comment about the gender composition of that distribution layer. So you are held up as a unicorn, relatively speaking, as a female founder in the whiskey space, in the alcohol space.
Yes.
That in and of itself is rare. Being a Black woman makes it rarer. But can you talk about what you said at this dinner about the gender composition of distributors and how that plays into the fact that you sit in such a rare seat?
Yeah, it's not even just gender. It's gender and race. The entire distributor tier, easily 99% of them in leadership are only 2 races, Jewish and Italian. And it doesn't mean that there is anything wrong with that. They started that distributor tier, and that's passed down from generation to generation. But think of the challenge that they have in understanding a brand like this. They have spent their entire careers marketing to, bourbon is being marketed to white men. Vodka is being marketed to women. Like, there are all these different segments. But they've never had anyone who looks like me and anyone of my gender sitting around the table that leads any of those companies. And so that the fact that the best way to describe it, or the way I like to describe it, is people can look at it as racism. They can look at it as gender bias. I don't. I look at it as a lack of familiarity. So if you take 2 little girls, and they've actually done this experiment, but if you take 2 little girls, a little Black girl, a little white girl, and you take them into a toy store, at least when we had toy stores. I think y'all still have FAO Swartz, at least at LGA, right?
Yes.
But if you take them into a toy store and say, pick any doll that you want, the little Black girl is going to pick a Black doll. The little white girl is going to pick a white doll. They're not racist. They're going to choose that because of familiarity. And so that's the nuance with this, is that when I sit with these distributors, I flat out remind them that their industry is rooted in the mob. That's where it came from. That's the founding of it. And then those families passed it down generation and generation and generation. And so a lot of it is still run like that. And so I tell them all the time, when have you ever seen any Black person other than Sammy Davis Jr. sitting with the mob? And so if their entire rooms, when they go to dinner, when they are spending time with people, if everyone looks like them, which they do, they lack the familiarity to understand the true significance of Uncle Nearest to America as a whole. So the biggest challenge is just having those conversations and being around them enough for them to become familiar with a person like me. That's the hardest part.
You are also hiring women and women of color. And to talk about families, you have a descendant from Nearest Green as your master distiller. Can you talk about how you got her on board?
So Victoria Edie Butler is our master blender. She's now 4-time master blender of the year. When it comes to bourbon, what I didn't really realize is the process is so similar from one distillery to the next that the taste profile for a lot of distilleries are not that dissimilar. What really sets each one apart are their master blenders. It's that person who can take 20 different barrels, blend it together, and create something that tastes like nothing else that's in the market. And Victoria is brilliant at it. But because she didn't go to school for it, I mean, she did the whole executive bourbon store and all that, but she was already a master blender before she did that. She just went off of instinct. What do I want to taste? What do I like? So she didn't follow a single rule. So one of the things that every master blender, for the most part, that they do around the world is you proof your whiskey down to 40 proof in order to taste it. Because what you're looking for is you're looking for flaws. So they add so much water, so then it's just 40 proof. They swish it around, they spit it out. And then what's left on the tongue is what they determine if it has flaws, if it doesn't have flaws. Well, Victoria never knew that she was supposed to be looking for flaws. She's looking for perfection. And she never knew she was supposed to spit it out. And so her thought process, even to this day, is if I spit it out, how do I know how it feels going down my throat, at my chest? How do I know if it burns or if it hugs? And so for her, she is still the only master blender that I know of in the world that sips at full proof and does not spit it out. That, like, straight out of the barrel, that's how she's enjoying it, because it lets her know what the full experience for a customer is going to be. So when people talk about how smooth Uncle Nearest is, when they talk about the fact that we're the most awarded bourbon and Tennessee whiskey for 2019, 2020, 2021, 22, 23, 24, it's because of her process and the fact that she's like, I'm going to drink it like the customer drinks it. So I know exactly how the entire experience is. And that's very unique to her. I mean, I think that would lay out most people, but she's fine with it.
Well, and just to add a little more context to Victoria, she had a multi-decade career not in whiskey. She was in law enforcement, and she was on our 50 over 50 list last year, which is why.
Was she?
Yes.
Oh, I love that.
So it's a remarkable story for her, but it plays into the story of Nearest Green and Uncle Nearest, I think.
Absolutely. So she was with the Department of Justice, and one of her jobs was to oversee analysts. So she's going, right now she's doing it with whiskey instead of dead bodies. But she's still essentially overseeing analysts, right? And people that are tasting it, and you know, her master blender house is much better than a crime scene. She'll tell you that. but it is the same meticulous attention to detail. That is what she brings to making her blends that make it into. And then she also selects all of the single barrels.
When we talk about stories, we talk about chapters, and Uncle Nearest is entering a new chapter that is not solely focused on whiskey. Fawn, can you tell us what's next or what's happening right now?
So coming into this industry, you could not have paid me to believe that I would go into anything outside of whiskey. It was going to be Uncle Nearest to the very end. But then as I began understanding that second tier, and how so many brands, especially brands that are created by women and people of color, which is 70% of this country, right? So you have us on the buying side, even beyond that 70%, even within the other 30%, most of the women in those households still control the purse. They decide what bourbon is coming into that house. And so you've got 70% of this country that is doing the majority of the buying. And yet, you don't have any from that 70% that have ever founded a company that succeeded. How's that possible? You've got the buyer, you have the maker. Mm-hmm. And so I recognize very early on it's that second tier. But I also recognize that they're just doing what they have to do to make sure that they grow and that they succeed. And so they're looking for sure bets every single time. And they're looking to make the spirit conglomerates happy. That's who pays the bill. So if bourbon is down with the spirit conglomerates, they have a vodka, they have a cognac, they have a tequila. So whatever's down, something else is up. And it's able to make sure that they're always making money. Well, if we were just whiskey, that means that there's only a small segment of the population that we can appeal to, because everybody's not going to love bourbon. Everyone's not going to love whiskey. And so I realized that in this industry, there had always been essentially, you had two routes to go when you came into the industry. Either you would fail, which easily 99% fail coming into this industry. Easily. It's probably more like 99.9, just based on what I've seen in the last 8 years. 99% fail. And if you happen to be one of the less than 1% that succeed, immediately you hit a ceiling when it comes to the second tier, where you really have no choice but to sell to one of the spirit conglomerates, to be a part of their distribution network, to have their marketing dollars, to have their backing. And so coming into it, I said, okay, there's always been only two options. Either you fail, and if by some, struck of luck, you don't fail, you're forced to sell because you can't go any further. And I looked at it and said, I'm not going to fail, and I'm also not going to sell. So then that means I've got to create a third option. That third option became, I have to build the spirit conglomerate. And that means that we don't just own a bourbon company, we don't just own a Tennessee whiskey company, but we also own a vodka company. So we bought Square One. It was this year, it celebrates its 20th anniversary of being the first organic craft spirits company in America. We bought it because it's the best vodka I'd ever tasted. I'm not a vodka fan. I'm not a vodka person. So it took us about 7 years to find a vodka I liked, and we found it with Square One. And then we became, 2 years ago, the largest Grand Champagne vineyard owner in the city of Cognac, France. And people saw that announcement. They thought, she's making champagne. Absolutely not. Not enough money in champagne. Talk about failing quick. Go into champagne. It is Grand Champagne is the creme de la creme grape for Cognac. And when I am looking at Cognac as a category, most people don't understand 100% is made in the Cognac, France region, but only 3% stays in France. 56% of the revenue for Cognac is here in America. And once you come into America, 54% that consume it are Black Americans. 19% are Black Latinos. Black Latinos are everybody that dances on 2 and 4. So when you walk by a bodega and you see a Puerto Rican or a Dominican and they're dancing to the same music as us, that's Black Latinos. So you have about 75% of the consumption of Cognac in the largest Cognac market in the world by far. It's consumed by Black people. And we've never had anything presented to us for our palate that was created by someone with our palate.
Fascinating. So perhaps a technical question, but will it be Uncle Nearest Cognac? Okay, no. So it'll be a different...
These are all separate companies. So think about it this way. I like to use Bacardi for an example because it's the easiest one. If I say Bacardi to a consumer, they immediately think of rum. They think of mojitos. But if I say Bacardi within our industry, nobody thinks of rum because that's not their biggest seller. What they think of is Patron Tequila, who they own. They think of Grey Goose Vodkas, who they own. They think of Douce Cognac, who they own. So Uncle Nearest Incorporated becomes the umbrella brand, but Uncle Nearest stands as the bourbon house, as the Tennessee whiskey house. Square One stands as the vodka house, and we haven't announced the name of the cognac, but that's coming really, really soon.
Oh, I'm so curious. All right, we're going to have you back when you're ready to announce that. But when you talk about financing some of these purchases, and this kind of goes back to your point earlier about investors, what's your strategy? Are you going off of your revenue, or are you approaching new investors for some of this growth?
All of the above. So there's such a multi-prong here because this is a long-term vision. Not every investor wants to be in long-term. So I have to make sure that I'm constantly cultivating investors to come in for the secondary market so that when someone is ready to go, we have someone ready to buy. And in this particular market, that's a great challenge because so few people are investing in illiquid anything, right? Now, granted, given the stock market, they probably should. They probably should start looking at investments like this more so. But because of that, it is that aspect of it. When the spirits market is down, it's a challenge. But I still have to make sure I'm doing it. I'm still looking for those right investors. I had a call with a group with a couple yesterday that wanted to invest, and I won't just take their check. I need to understand, why do you want to invest? Are you with me for the long term? Because if you're looking for me to exit in 2 years and 3 years, that's not where we're headed here. Mm-hmm. That's not what I'm looking to do. So I want to make sure that we're aligned on the vision. And so I am constantly raising money, but I'm also constantly improving our cash flow to make sure that we're able to pay for the things that we need and to expand and to grow. The amount of expenses I've cut from Q1 of 2024 to Q1 of 2025 is pretty astounding because we still grew double digits in doing that.
I want to quickly emphasize something that you just said. You were on the phone with a couple. These are individual investors. Yeah. You don't go the traditional VC or private equity route.
No.
Why?
Because then I'm just something on a spreadsheet. And most of the time, you've got a bunch of junior analysts trying to find problems with the company. They're looking for them because they are trying to show their value, their worth. So they're looking at graphs, they're looking at charts, and they're not looking at who is the person behind it, who is the founder behind it. One of our lead investors, one of our major investors, he reminds me all the time. He says, Fawn, you don't invest in the horse, you invest in the jockey. You don't bet on the horse, you bet on the jockey. And he was like, and all my money's on this jockey. The reason why that's important is because that jockey has to be able to make mistakes, has to be able to pivot if something isn't going right. But when you've got junior analysts looking at a graph and they look at something go down, then there's a panic that creates a larger panic that creates a bigger issue. Now I'm spending time explaining something that we've tried out that we may or may not decide to pivot from. Instead of pivoting, I'm now explaining to you why we tried it out to begin with. I don't have that kind of time when I'm trying to disrupt an entire industry. I'm trying to build a spirit conglomerate, something that has not been done in over 100 years and something that has never been done by someone who wasn't a white male. I have to have the ability to make mistakes and to fix those mistakes. But if an investor is sitting across from me, they can look in my eyes and go, there is zero chance this woman is going to fail. She will sell her house, her cars, everything on her back before she ever lets this fail. A spreadsheet can't tell that story.
You are determined not to fail, but we are speaking in a moment of tremendous economic uncertainty. Mm-hmm. You referenced tariffs earlier. Can you talk about the impact you've been feeling over the last few weeks? And we should frame this as the ground is shifting beneath our feet. The policies have kind of been changing week by week. But what's been the effect that you've felt?
So here's the thing. First of all, I anticipated it. I expected it. I planned for it. Why? Because the incoming administration told us very clearly what they were going to do. I mean, the entire time Trump was running this second time, he kept talking about tariffs. So I don't understand why the 50% of the country that voted for him are now shocked by the tariffs. There is literally nothing he has done since coming into office that has shocked me. Nothing.
Not even the size, because I've spoken to people on Wall Street who said we expected the tariffs, but not the extent of that April 2nd announcement.
Have you ever seen him do anything that wasn't over the top? Why would anybody expect that it was going to be reasonable, that it was going to be 10%? More importantly, we have started 6 trade wars in the history of our country. Every single one has hurt us. It hurt our automotive industry. It hurt our farmers. We can go across the board, and never has tariffs worked. What has worked are 0-for-0 agreements across the board. We can go through every single time we've done a 0-for-0 agreement. We'll take spirits, for example. The 0-for-0 agreement that we agreed to in 1997, until that was reversed in 2018, our collective industries, our collective trade grew 450%, close to $8 billion was that growth. That is success. When you look at the 0-for-0 agreement on our microchips, on most of our technology that we need to be able to buy in order to make some of the incredible things that like NVIDIA makes, right? Mm-hmm. When you look at that, the reason why we're able to do that is because of the 0-for-0 trade agreement. So you're talking about something that has benefited this country by trillions of dollars. But that's not the conversation that this administration is having. Why? Because there's no shock in that. There's no headlines in that. 0-for-0 agreement gets you no headlines. You know what gets you a headline? Is putting 145% tariff on China. You know what keeps you in the headlines? So we had to understand that if we're electing someone whose priority is to be on everyone's lips every single day, to be in the headlines, you're talking about a person who did The Apprentice, who literally was firing people on television, right? I don't know why we want him to be someone different than who he is. It's not fair to him. It's not fair to the country. We should have taken him at his word. I am going to come in here and I'm going to disrupt everything. I'm going to disrupt the markets. I'm going to do all of that. We should have taken him at his word.
So you were taking him at his word.
Absolutely.
What did you do to, I hate the word future-proof. It's become kind of jargon.
But I can tell you. So there's a couple of things. Number one, all of the glass, so our glass all comes in from overseas. Every bit of glass that we need for the next 2 years is already in America. Every bit of cork, we get our corks from Portugal, all in America for what we need for the next 2 years. Because it was very clear that if he was able to win both the House and the Senate, there would be no guardrails, which means that he could essentially do whatever he wanted with tariffs. And he had already said, I'm putting in tariffs. And so we began making sure that whatever we needed for the next 2 years that was coming from outside of this country, that we had it in our country already. From Q1 of 2024 to Q1 of 2025, we cut our expenses by about 40%. But we still figured out how to grow. And so these are the things that we had to begin doing the moment we saw the administration and where that was going to go. Because then we knew, okay, the market is going to get crazy, credit lines are going to get tight, and money is going to be expensive. And a company our size, how are we able to weather a storm like that, but to prepare for it in advance?
So you really looked at the equation in front of you and decided to cut costs.
I took him at his word. He'd been saying the same thing for 2 years. This is not, what we're looking at right now, everyone is treating it like it's a new trade war. It's not a new trade war. This is part 2 of the original trade war that he never finished. And so we had an anticipation that he was going to finish that trade war. When we forecasted for 2025, by October of last year, we had pulled out all numbers that were in relation to international sales, all revenue, because we didn't anticipate any would come in. So for us, if we get international revenue this year, woohoo!
Oh, so it's just a fun bonus.
It's a fun bonus. That is the cherry on top. But what we're doing does not focus at all on international sales.
But you're getting them.
We are, but not what we would otherwise be. Meaning our focus would not, we would have been pushing into other countries. So 2 years ago, in 2018, so now what's that, 6 years ago, right? In 2018, we had already begun going into other countries around the world. We knew the story of Nearest Green, of Uncle Nearest, would resonate in so many countries around the world. So by the middle of 2018, we were already in 12 countries. Once the tariffs began, we had just really laid down groundwork in the EU, and we were beginning to build. And here comes these tariffs. The 0 for 0 agreements were from 97, were all of a sudden, poof, gone. And so we looked at that and said, oh my gosh, if something could be reversed like that after 21 years of a successful agreement, if just on a whim it could be, then we're vulnerable. And we're too young and we're too small to be that vulnerable. And so we began pulling everything from international back into the US, with almost all of our resources going into building this company in the US. So as the tariffs were hitting, I was getting all these text messages from our investors. I call them our sixth man because they help us to grow this company. I was getting all these text messages going, how does this impact us? And every single one I was able to respond and go, not at all.
Sure, investors really like to hear that answer. I want to ask about another potential economic threat. And in New York City, we see bars and restaurants struggling a little bit, A, because of rent, but B, because consumers are drinking less. Some of this is due to the economic conditions that we've been discussing, and some of this is due to health concerns. Mm-hmm. Are you worried about bigger shifts in consumer trends here and a general decline?
No. It's the same reason why prohibition was such a failed experiment. Like, we're America, we're going to drink. We may not drink as much as Russia, but we're going to drink. So here's the thing that people, they get really worked up in the middle of temporary issues. And so when you are looking at consumption being down, are you not consuming a lot less than you did during COVID? I'm consuming a lot less than I did during COVID. Why? Because we consumed too much during COVID, right? And so we have to expect the pendulum swings. It's why when someone is in the White House and everyone on both sides at this point is like mad, I'm never bothered by it. Why? It's a pendulum swing. It's going to come back the other way. Unfortunately, every single time that pendulum swings, the way that our country is now built, it's swinging pretty wildly. And so you can expect that pendulum is going to keep going back and forth. And so right now, people are going to drink less alcohol. This is how I can tell you that this will not last. The non-alc movement, you want to know how big it got for spirits? It got up to 1% of the entire non-alcoholic movement. And then it hit a ceiling. And it's been going down ever since. Why? Because they have to add so much stuff, all of these additives, to try to mirror the flavor of something that is naturally carb-free, sugar-free, fat-free, and gluten-free. They have to add all of this stuff. So then you have to argue, is that actually better for you? Is that healthy, or is it better to just drink in moderation? Is it better to just drink what is actually recommended for people to consume in terms of spirits? And so what we're looking at here is a pendulum swing. Ask me this question again in 2 years. I guarantee you the pendulum is already on its way back up.
I will ask you in 2 years. So I will say, as someone who has tried to bring her drinking down for some health reasons, my choice is either I will have alcohol tonight or I will have just water. It is not, will I have a mocktail?
Yeah,
so
exactly. And once people realize that they're sitting down and the mocktails or the non-alcoholic cocktails, when you look at the amount of calories and sugar in that relative to sitting down and just sipping on a glass of Uncle Nearest, number one, those mocktails, you drink them so fast because your body loves sugar. That dopamine is like, woohoo, give me more, give me more, give me more. But when you sit down and you have something like Uncle Nearest that has no sugar in it, you can literally sip on that all night. It's relaxing. It's enjoyable. You have a great conversation. You're not waking up with a hangover. But, you get into those mocktails, there's so much sugar, you kind of get a sugar hangover. And then you have a sugar crash. So those are not here to stay. I mean, you'll still have some people that do it, but then their waistline will start expanding and they'll come back to purpose.
That is an interesting prediction. While we're talking about the future, you said, I'm not going to fail and I'm not going to sell.
Yeah.
What is the future? What is the legacy you're building? Is there an IPO? Is it, you mentioned a conglomerate. What's the preview you can give us?
Who knows? What I know for sure is I am 48 years old. I'll be 49 this year. I plan to go at this pace for the next 25 years. And I plan to ensure that this company continues to grow in double digits, no matter if we have a year like the year we're having, where everybody is declining or, things seem to be in turmoil, or if we're having a great year. It's my responsibility as the CEO of this company to figure out how in every single situation, how to grow this company. And I'm going to keep doing it. And so there could be an IPO. There could be a number of things. Selling will not be one of them, though.
Selling will not be one of them. As we talk about legacy, Harvard Business School wrote a case study on Uncle Nearest.
They're doing their second as we speak.
What do you hope students learn from your experience as a founder?
I hope that they challenge the way that people think that businesses need to be built. I hope that they challenge this notion that you have to have VC and PE money. And I think it's important because one of the things that you will notice where a founder comes out, especially women, when you look at the PE and VC space, again, there's a lack of familiarity there, right? There's a lack of, we do business differently than they do, and we should. We're different. Mm-hmm. We're wired differently, so we shouldn't be trying to do it the same as them. But there is this lack of familiarity. So when you see a woman who builds something phenomenal and then takes VC money, you can clock it with an egg timer. Within 3 years, all of a sudden, they're putting people on that board that founder doesn't want. Give them 5 years, she's out every single time. Find me a company that hasn't happened yet, that the woman was a founder, took VC money, and she wasn't out within 5 years. Find me one.
Canva comes to mind.
Well, think about how she built, though. Canva, nobody would give her any money. And so she forged that by herself. She did that with almost nothing. She bootstrung that. So that meant that she held the power. So before any VC ever came into Canva, she already had established the power and she had already set her boundaries in advance.
You think about power. You've been
Absolutely.
Careful about not just not taking VC and PE money, but I've heard you say that you have waited till the last possible second to fundraise.
Which is a problem, by the way. It could be a little stressful for everybody around me. But I do that because I believe in my ability to grow the valuation of the company every day that I am running it. And so I look at it and say, if I can hold on for 6 more months, I have grown the value of this company by more in 6 months, which means I'm giving up less shares for that same amount of money. So I've done that every single time. But the power isn't about a power trip. The power is making sure, the control is making sure that I'm able to see this vision that I began, that I'm able to see it to the very end. And I can't do that if somebody else is calling shots. So one of the things my 6th man will tell you, my investor group will tell you, I listen to what they say. I will bring things to them that I'm not required to because I hold the votes. But I care about their opinions. I care about their experience. But ultimately, I am asking them to believe in me, even if they can't see where I'm going in the moment I'm going, believe that I am not going to fail at this.
And in general, it seems like they do believe you. And
They
you've
do.
talked before about how with investors, or at least your strategy, all it takes is, I only needed one.
Only needed one.
Who was your one?
Michael Berman, and God bless him. That he passed away a couple years ago, and he was so sick and he was so frail at the very end. And there were only 2 things he wanted to do, and one of those things was to make it back to Nearest Green Distillery. Michael Berman is. They wrote his obituary in the Los Angeles Times when he passed away. Is he was the kingmaker in LA politics for a really long time, but nobody knew his name, and it was by design. He was behind the scenes doing the strategy for some of the most brilliant politicians that we knew, but people didn't know that he was behind the scenes. There's one particular Republican president, and I love this story because he loved to tell it. Michael was a chain smoker. I mean, a chain smoker. So when they took the cigarettes off of planes, he refused to get on the planes. They sent Air Force One for him. No, not Air Force One, Philip Morris One. When they had Philip Morris One, they sent Philip Morris One for him to bring him to the White House because they had a strategy they needed him to work through. The man was brilliant, but nobody knew who he was. He was behind the scenes, and he happened to be my husband's former boss. He was the one. And he told us when we began, he said, this is crazy. You got a $24 billion company who your trademarks are in the middle of theirs, referring to Brown-Forman, Jack Daniel's owner. Your trademarks are going to bump up against theirs. And if they decide to spend hundreds of millions of dollars suing you, every penny that I'm about to put in your company is going to go. But I believe in you, so I'm going to do it anyway. And he put in the first $250,000. We've always had a minimum of $250 to get on the cap table. It's now $500, but we always had a minimum of $250. He put in the first $250. Then he brought in 5 other people that brought in $250. Then he doubled up to $500, and so did they. And so I tell people all the time, because they go and they become so discouraged pitching this VC, that VC, this VC, that VC, and hearing no, 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 no. They become so discouraged that they begin to think that there's something wrong with them. And what I tell them all the time is, if you have a solid business plan, and if you have no backup plan, meaning success is your only option and you are not going to fail, you're going to keep going no matter what. Stop trying to pitch people. Literally only look for the one. There's over 20 million millionaires in America trying to figure out how to grow their portfolios, trying to figure out how to grow their wealth. If you are excited about your company, if you're excited about your brand, you could be standing next to your next investor in the line at Starbucks. People don't look at it that way. They think they have to go into an office and pitch a round table of people or pitch a conference room of table. No, you should be pitching on the street every single day. Every person who you're talking to, talking about how incredible your brand is. But more importantly, investors don't really invest in a product. They invest in the person. And so what you have to make sure that they know is, under no circumstances will you give up.
And you seem like under no circumstances will you give up.
0.
If we speak again in a year,
Yeah.
What do you wish to be able to report to Forbes about what you've accomplished in the ensuing year?
That our vodka company has come back into the market and our cognac has come into the market, and both are as successful as Uncle Nearest in the next year.
In the next year. All right, we're going to have you back in that year. Fawn Weaver, thank you so much for sitting down with Forbes.
I appreciate you.